The headlines. Breaking through the static. Global update.
Hi guys, here is the chronicles of Russian-Ukrainian war, and today is July 31st of 2026. Here is Tolly Sands, and we are talking about the last events and evolution of Russian aggression against Ukraine. So like it, subscribe it, and ask your question in comments, and we're starting to talking about main news, what's happening last days in Ukraine. So key takeaways. First, Russian forces conducted a large-scale strike series against Ukraine on the night of July 29th and 30th, that featured a particularly large number of missiles and aimed to exploit Ukraine's shortage of ballistic missile interceptors. The second, Russian missile strike targets a wide swath of Ukraine deep rear and resulted in high civilian casualties. Russian forces continue to increase the number of missiles while decreasing the number of drone and strike packages, likely to exploit Ukraine's shortage of ballistic missiles interceptors, while Ukraine's drone interception rate remain high. Russia also used at least one North Korean provided ballistic missile for the first time since summer 2025, following reported recent North Korean missile deliveries to Russia. Also, likely Russian Ha-101 cruise missile crashed in eastern Poland during Russia's large-scale missile strike against western Ukraine on the night of July 29th to 30th. Also, Russian missile and drone incursions into NATO territory during Russian strike on Ukraine appear to be a risk the Kremlin has accepted. Ukrainian forces are attempting to help NATO defend its airspace and territory during large Russian missile and drone strikes that threaten NATO members. Also, Ukraine's continued strike campaign against Wildberries warehouses, the closest Russian equivalent to Amazon, through Russia is imposing significant cost on the company, retailers, and consumers. Also, Russian authorities appear to be focusing on resolving Wildberries supply issue affecting ordinary Russians, as opposed to the more pressing issue of protecting the Russia rear against Ukrainian strikes. Recently appointed Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief, Major General Mikhailo Drapatый, is starting to make personal changes as he takes command on the Ukrainian armed forces. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and government continue to undergo personnel shuffles. Russian forces continued their campaign against Ukrainian port infrastructure and merchant ships. Ukrainian forces continued their long-range strike campaign against Russian port and oil infrastructure on the night of July 29th to 30th. Neither Russian nor Ukrainian force made confirmed advance on July 30th. So, top lines, Russian forces conducted a large-scale strike series against Ukraine on the night of July 29th to 30th, that featured a particularly large number of missiles and aimed to exploit Ukrainians' shortage of ballistic missile interceptors. The Ukrainian Air Force reported that Russian forces launched 284 Shahed-type Gerbera type and Italmas type strike drones, and Parodia type decoy drones from the directions of Bryansk, Oryol, and Kursk, and also Shatalova in Smolensk region of Russia. Russian forces also launched a total of 74 missiles. 4 Zircon Onyx anti-ship missile from Kursk Oblast, 9 Iskander-M S-400 and KN-23 ballistic missiles from Bryansk, Voronezh, and Kursk Oblast, and 61 Ha-101 caliber cruise missile from Vologda Oblast and Novorossiysk in Krasnodarsk region. The Ukrainian Air Force reported that Ukrainian forces downed 1 ballistic missiles, 54 cruise missiles, and 265 drones. But 3 anti-ship missiles, 6 ballistic missiles, 2 cruise missiles, and 17 drones struck 20 locations, and that debris fell at 13 locations. Ukrainian authorities were reportedly clarifying information about 8 of the missiles as of 9 a.m. this morning. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned on the evening of July 29th that Russia had prepared a massive strike a few days ago, which Russian forces would highly likely launch on the 9th of July 24th to 30th. Russian missile strike targeted a wide swath of Ukraine deep rear and resulted in high civilian casualties. The Ukrainian Air Force reported that the large-scale strike series mostly targeted Kyiv and Lviv Oblast and included simulation wave from various directions. Ukrainian officials reported that Russian forces struck residential, educational, port, and civilian infrastructure in Lviv region, Poltava, Kharkov, Mykolaiv, Sumy, Vinnytsia, Cherkasy, Kirovograd, Zhytomyr, and Ivano-Frankivsk region. A Russian ballistic missile strike against Radushne in Dnipropetrovsk region destroyed a residential building and killed 2 parents and 4 of their children. President Zelensky reported that at least 8 people died and a dozen more were injured in the overnight strikes. Russian forces continue to increase the number of missiles while decreasing the number of drones in strike packages, likely to exploit Ukraine's shortage of ballistic missile interceptors, as Ukraine's drone interception rate remains really high. The July 29th and 30th strike package notably caused significant damage even through the number of strike vehicles and decoys in the package. It was like 358 air targets. Was not the largest that Russia has launched against Ukraine. Russian forces have launched larger salvos containing over 500 drones and missiles multiple times in recent months. The overnight strike nevertheless had devastating effects due to its use of ballistic missiles that Ukraine force have few days to defend against the moment. Russian forces have overall been launching fewer drones and more missiles recently, having launched 4,606 drones and 376 missiles so far in July, and 5,749 drones and 181 missiles in June. A Kremlin-affiliated Russian meal blogger noted on July 30th that Russian forces have been unable to massively deploy Shahed-type drones to strike deep in Ukrainian rear due to a saturation of Ukrainian air defense, effective against Shahed-type drones, and limitation in Russia's communication capabilities that restrict the drone's ranges. The meal blogger noted that Russian forces primarily used air-to-air missiles to strike Western Ukraine on July 29th and 30th, but added that Russia does not have any of these missiles as it does drones. Russia also used at least one North Korean provided ballistic missile for the first time since summer 2025, following reported recent North Korean missile deliveries to Russia. The Ukrainian Air Force noted that Russian forces launched an unspecified numbers of North Korean provided KN-23 missiles overnight. President Zelensky reported that preliminary information indicates that Russian forces used North Korean missile for the first time in a long time to strike Radushne in Dnipropetrovsk region. A source told Reuters on July 30th that Russia's use of North Korean missile suggests that Russia has compiled a stock of the missiles. And another source reportedly started to say that the last Ukrainian confirmed use of North Korean missile in a Russian strike package was early August 2025. President Zelensky warned on July 25th that North Korea was sending additional ballistic missiles to Russia. North Korea's provision of more missiles to Russia features Russia's ongoing efforts to move away from massive drone strikes and to instead lean more heavily into its large missile strike to exploit Ukrainians' current shortage of interceptors capable of intercepting ballistic missiles. Russia use North Korean missiles also provides North Korea with battlefield testing and feedback to further improve the missiles, as Russia and North Korea have done in the past. Likely, Russian Ha-101 cruise missile crashed in eastern Poland during Russia's large-scale missile strike against western Ukraine on the night of July 29th to 30th. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk reported on July 30th that an armed missile, likely a Russian Ha-101 cruise missile, entered Polish airspace and fell in the field near Tarnowa Kolonia, Lublin Voivodeship, roughly 90 kilometers from the Polish-Ukrainian border. Prime Minister Tusk noted that there is no reason to think that Polish territory was the intended target of this missile. The Polish Armed Force Operational Command reported that Russian long-range aviation was undergoing intense combat observation, and Poland observed at least 12 missiles flying over the western Ukraine that potentially posed a threat to Polish airspace. Russian missile and drone incursions into NATO territory during Russian strikes on Ukraine appear to be a risk the Kremlin has accepted. Russian drones have violated NATO airspace and struck NATO territory or neighboring Moldova before, but this is the first time that a Russian missile has done so. Such Russian behavior, regardless of whether these instances are deliberate or incidental, continues to demonstrate how Russian President Vladimir Putin has adopted a reckless policy that accepts the risk that Russian missile and drone strikes on Western Ukraine may also strike neighboring states, including those in NATO. ISW continues to assess that NATO may need to consider negotiating possible air defense agreements with Ukraine as a matter of self-defense against Russian drone strike against NATO countries, regardless of whether the Russian drone incursion are accidental or intentional. Ukrainian forces are attempting to help NATO defend its airspace and territory during large Russian missile and drone strike that threaten NATO members. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, stated that Ukrainian fighter pilots attempted to intercept the missiles that were approaching to Polish border. Ukraine's continued strike campaign against Wildberries warehouses with closest Russian equivalent to Amazon. Ukrainian forces have been undertaking a deliberate campaign to strike Wildberries facilities in Russia and occupied Ukraine since July 17 or 18, with Ukrainian officials reporting that the logistics centers supply the Russian military with drone components and navigation equipment. Wildberries reported that Ukrainian forces conducted additional drone strike against the warehouses on the night of July 29th and 30th, hitting facilities in Penza region and Republic of Udmurtia. ISW recently assessed that intensified Ukrainian strikes against Wildberry facilities will likely increasingly inconvenience Russians who utilize the platform. Many Russians retailers who sell through Wildberries have been complaining about the consequences they are personally facing after strikes have destroyed their merchandise. Leningrad region Governor Alexander Drozdenko claimed on July 30th, for example, that about 1,500 Wildberry sellers in the region lost their goods to fire after recent Ukrainian drone strike against the company warehouses. Russian authorities appear to be focusing on resolving Wildberries supply issue affecting ordinary Russians, as opposed to the more pressing issue of protecting the Russian rear against Ukrainian strike. Russian Deputy Prime Minister and Economic Minister Alexander Novak chaired a meeting on July 30th of a government subcommittee on enhancing the stability of a financial sector and the individual economic sector to discuss assistance to Wildberries partner sellers who products Ukrainian strike have damaged. Novak emphasized the Russian government's need to provide support to affected small and medium-sized businesses. Economic Development Minister of Russia, Maxim Reshetnikov, outlined 3 key tasks that the Russian government must address soon to ensure stable retailer operation, all of which focused on ensuring supplies to consumers. Russia was notably unable to cope with its massive air defense requirements even before the start of the Ukrainian campaign against Wildberries in mid-July. Ukraine's strikes on these new targets set will only strain Russian air defense further. ISW continues to assess that Russia will likely fail to adequately fulfill its growing air defense needs because the Russian defense industrial base and the military will struggle to rapidly strengthen the air defense umbrella to cover both the frontline and its vast rear situation. Ukrainian forces will likely be able to continue, if not intensify, their long-range strike campaign and increased investment in Ukrainians' ability to conduct strikes in Russia. Vulnerable rear significantly degrades Russia's ability to continue protracting the war. Russian authorities similarly focused on resolving consequences to consumers, as opposed to issue with air defense when Ukrainian strikes caused wild-scale fuel shortage in the start of the summer, further highlighting Russia's inability to take serious action toward strengthening its air defense umbrella at this time. Russia exposed rear areas and continued inability to defend its airspace present a major vulnerability that Ukraine, if supported, can exploit. Recently appointed Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Major General Mikhailo Drapatый is starting to make personnel changes as he takes command of Ukrainian armed forces. Drapatый on July 29th relieved Major General Alexander Gruzevich as the Chief of Staff and Deputy Commander of Land Forces, relieved Major General Vladimir Karpenko as a Commander of the Logistic Forces, and terminated the secondment of the Commander of Missile Force and Artillery, Major General Andrei Malinovsky, to the General Staff, where he had been observing Ukrainian long-range strikes against Russia since 2024. Ukrainian media organization Babel reported that its source stated that a presidential decree will create a new command to coordinate and optimize the joint work of Ukrainians' long-range strikes. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and government continued to undergo personnel shuffles. The Ukrainian Cabinet of Ministers approved the appointment of human rights activist Lyubov Galan as the Deputy Minister of Defense, overseeing the development and the preservation of human capital in the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian state-owned defense enterprise. Manager Ukroboronprom acting CEO Sergei Boyev as the Deputy Minister of Defense for European integration. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appointed former Economy Minister Alexei Sobolev as the Deputy Head of the Ukrainian Presidential Office with a focus on the economy. Alena Voronova as the Head of the Personnel Department of Ukraine Security service like SBU, and former head of the SBU, Center of Command and Control, Brigadier General Oleg Fedory, as the head of SBU Alpha Special Operations Center in place of acting Defense Minister Yevgeny Khmara. Okay, now Ukrainian operation on the Russian Federation. Ukrainian forces continued long-range strike campaign against Russian port and oil infrastructure on the night of July 29 to 30th. Guys, like, subscribe, and ask your question in chat, and I'm continue. The Ukrainian Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security and our open source intelligence sources posted imagery and footage showing fire and smoke at the port of Taman in Krasnodar region of Russia. It's roughly 260 kilometers from the front line. After Ukrainian strikes on the night of July 29 to 30th, including at the Taman Neftegas seaborne oil export terminal. And NASA fire information for resource management system data from July 30th shows heat anomalies at the port of Taman. Ukrainian strikes are causing lasting damage to Russian oil refineries. The Financial Times reported on July 30th that it reviewed photograph, satellite images, thermal infrared data, and refinery layouts indicating that Ukrainian strike against major Russian oil facilities have caused damage lasting for weeks and sometimes months after the original strike. Financial Times assessed that Ukrainian forces have disabled over 30% of Russian actual refining capacity and 45% of Russian nominal refining capacity. Financial Times reported that it observed the most signs of Ukrainian strikes at Russia's 10 largest refineries, including in Omsk and Moscow cities and Tuapse, and that it observed damage at these locations on satellite imagery taken weeks or months after Ukrainian strikes. Financial Times report that smaller refineries also largely inoperative and are visibly damaged. Researcher at Sapienza University of Rome, Fabio Sabatini, told Financial Times that nighttime radiance around 29 large Russian refineries indicates that the refineries showed activity even after coming back online following Ukrainian drone strike. So this is the situation. Russian objective, create defensible buffer zones in Sumy Oblast among the international Russian-Ukrainian border. Russian forces continued offensive operation in Sumy region on July 29th and 30th, but did not make confirmed advances. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed on July 30th that Russian forces seized Magritsa, it's northeast of Sumy city, and Malaya Slobodka, northwest of Sumy city. The Russian Ministry of Defense credited elements of the 22nd and 41st Motorized Rifle Regiment, BAF of the 72nd Motorized Rifle Division and 44th Army Corps. Leningrad Military District with the claimed seizure of Mokhritsa. A source reporting on the Russian northern grouping of force implied on July 30th that the Russian forces have not seized Makhritsa or Mala Slabitka. However, the source claimed the observed rumors that Russian forces replaced the commander of the 127th Motorized Rifle Regiment, it's 71st Motorized Rifle Division, and the regiment's 1st Battalion commander, possibly because of commanders were implicated in an episode in which AI altered footage purportedly showing a Russian service member raising a Russian flag in Billy Kolodets was published. The Ukrainian Kursk group of forces refuted on July 30th the Russian Ministry of Defense. July 29th claimed that Russian forces seized Novosich, it's northeast of Sumy city, stating that Ukrainian forces fully control the settlement. So, Eastern Ukraine, Russian objective, push Ukrainian forces back from the international border to create defense buffer zone with Belgorod Oblast and approach to within tube artillery range of Kharkov city. Russian forces continued offensive operations in northern Kharkov Oblast on July 29th and 30th, but did not make confirmed advances. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed on July 30th that Russian forces seized Yurchenkova, southwest of Kharkov city, and Russian Mil blogger claimed on July 30th that Russian force seized Billy Kolodets, southeast of Vovchansk. Russian sources credited elements of the 69th Motorized Rifle Division with the claimed seizure of Yurchenkova. Source reporting of Russian North grouping of forces implied that Russian forces have not seized Yurchenko. However, a Ukrainian brigade spokesperson operating in Vovchansk direction reported that Russian forces continue conducting flag raising to exaggerate the extent of their advances in the Vovchansk direction. Elements of Russian Rubicon Center for Advanced Unnamed Technology are reportedly scaling up drone strikes in Kharkov Oblast. Ukrainian Force Center for Unnamed System head Dmitro Batinov stated on July 30th that drone operation of the Rubicon Center have been increasing operation in northern and eastern Kharkov Oblast since the end of March 2026. Batinov stated that the Rubicon drone operation are well trained but few in numbers, especially compared to the total number of Russian drone operators, and that Ukrainian forces are striking Rubicon drone operators. Russian forces continue using Shahed-type drones against near-air target in Kharkov direction. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed on July 30th that Russian Giran, Russian version of Iranian Shahed drone, operators struck a Ukrainian warehouse near Kharkov city in Andreevka. Russian forces continued offensive operation in the Veliki Burluk direction on July 30th, but did not make a confirmed advance. The Russian Mil blogger claimed on July 30th that the Russian forces advances north of Anenske. Geolocated footage posted on July 30th show Russian forces striking a claimed Ukrainian observation post west of Ivashina, northwest of Veliki Burluk, with 5 FAB-250 glide bombs. Russian objective cross the Oskil river to Kharkiv Oblast and push westward into eastern Kharkiv Oblast and northern Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces continue offensive operation in Kupiansk direction on July 29th and 30th, but did not advance. A source reporting on the Russian Western grouping of forces claimed on July 30th that Ukrainian forces are conducting remote mining operation in depth of 15 to 20 kilometers from the front line to disrupt Russian near-air logistic and supply lines to frontline units in the Kupiansk direction. Russian forces continued offensive operation in Borovo direction on July 29th and 30th, but did not advance as Ukrainian forces counterattack in the area. A Russian mill blogger and the source reporting on the Russian Western grouping of forces claimed on July 20th that Ukrainian forces counterattacked near Rybka-Dub, Nova Katerinovka and Karpivka, all southeast of Borovo. Ukrainian forces continued their intermediate range strike campaign against Russian military assets in occupied Luhansk Oblast. Geolocated footage published on July 29th showed Ukrainian forces striking a Russian personnel concentration in occupied western Lysychansk, approximately 38 kilometers from the front line, with a GBU-64 precision bomb. An open source intelligence source reported on July 29th that this strike killed at least 18 Russian military personnel, including the commander, deputy commander for logistics, and the medical company commander of an unspecified regiment, and wounded dozens of officers. Okay, next one. Guys, like it, subscribe, please. Russian objective: capture the entirety of Donetsk Oblast, the claimed territory of Russia's proxies in Donbass, and advance into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Russian forces continued offensive operation near and within Liman and east of Slavyansk on July 29th and 30th, but did not make confirmed advances. A Russian mill blogger claimed on July 30th that Russian forces advanced south of Piskunivka. A source reporting on Russian Western grouping of forces and Russian mill bloggers claimed that Ukrainian forces still hold position in eastern and southern Liman and Kaliniki, east of Slavyansk. Another mill blogger argued on July 29th that Russian forces will not seize Slavyansk in 2026. Contrary to the Russian military command's reported deadline to seize all of Donetsk Oblast, all Donetsk region, by the end of 2026, in my opinion, it's really impossible for Russian forces. Russian forces continue conducting intensified glide bomb strike to support their offensive operation in Slavyansk direction. Geolocated footage published on July 30th shows Russian forces striking a Ukrainian position in Ryakhorodok near Slavyansk with 5 FAB-250 glide bombs. Russian forces have been increasingly leveraging their superior aviation capabilities to conduct glide bomb strikes that physically destroy Ukrainian cities and strongholds, enable Russian infiltrators to enter and eventually seize and consolidate positions. Degradation of Russian aviation capabilities would hinder Russian forces' ability to use glide bomb strikes and their resulting rubble to conceal infantry, likely showing Russian advances on the ground. Ukrainian counter-attack and drone operation are reportedly hindering the Russian rate of advance within the near Konstantinovka. A Kremlin-affiliated Russian meal blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are infiltrating into Dolga Balka, west of Konstantinovka, from Mykolaiv, I can spell it, northeast of Dobra Balka, and acknowledged that Ukrainian forces maintain position in Chervona, northeast of Konstantinovka. The meal blogger claimed that numerous Ukrainian drone operators are providing cover and supplies to infiltrating Ukrainian forces, complicating Russian efforts to push Ukrainian forces from Dobra Balka in particular. The meal blogger claimed that some unspecified sources misreported footage showing Russian infiltrators on the southern outskirts of Alexeyevo-Drushkovka, northeast of Konstantinovka, and showing Russian forces near Drushkivka, consistent with mixed report that Russian forces reached the outskirts of Drushkivka and Alexeyevo-Drushkivka on July 29. Russian sources are characterizing Russian attacks in the Dobropilye tactical area as a preparation for a wide envelopment of the fortress belt from the west and southwest. All through Russian forces remain extremely unlikely to conduct any such rapid operational maneuver given to nature of the kill zone and Russian forces persistent challenges with reported maneuvers to the battlefield. A Russian meal blogger assessed that Russian forces aim to begin an offensive against Drushkovka, Kramatorsk, and Slavyansk from the west after seizing Dobropilye. The meal blogger's statement implies that Russian forces aim to conduct a wide envelopment of Ukrainian Donetsk Oblast fortress belt. An ambitious undertaking that Russian forces are unlikely to be able to achieve in the near to medium term given their inability to use mechanized equipment, use of slow infiltration tactics, and overall slow rate of advance in the area. Russian forces have been trying to seize the Dobropilye since launching attack in that direction in August 2025, more than a year ago. ISW has observed evidence to assess that Russian forces have advanced to within about 8 kilometers of Dobropilye southeastern border, and that Russian infiltrators are operating about 4 kilometers from their settlement. Russian forces conducted offensive operation in Pokrovsk direction, and as Russian sources made unsustainable and substantiated claims that Russian forces recently advanced north of Pokrovsk. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed on July 30th that Russian forces seized Chernihivka north of Pokrovsk. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian force seized Vadiansk, just south of Chernihivka. Russian mill bloggers claimed that Russian forces advanced north of Mirna, it's northwest of Pokrovsk, and between Byletsky, north of Pokrovsk, and Svitle, west of Byletsky. Ukrainian forces are striking Russian armored and motorized vehicles in the Russian near area before they can reach the front line. A Ukrainian union operating in the Pokrovsk direction reported on July 30th that Ukrainian forces defeated a Russian column, strange unspecified, including infantry, fighting vehicles, and motorized vehicles near Novgorodivka. Russian forces continued limited offensive operation near Novopavlovka itself on July 29th and 30th, but did not advance. Russian forces continued limited infiltration mission in Alexandrovka direction on July 29th and 30th. Geolocated footage published on July 29th shows Ukrainian forces striking a Russian service member northwest of Kalinivsk. After that, ISW assesses that was a Russian infiltration mission. Ukrainian forces continued their intermediate range strike campaign against Russian air defenses, drone infrastructure, and the gas station in occupied Donetsk region. Ukrainian unnamed system forces, Commander Major Robert Magyar Brovdi, stated on July 30th that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian Buk M3 air defense system in occupied Snizhne, about 98 kilometers from the front line. And the drone shortage and launch site is occupied in occupied Donetsk city, about 57 kilometers from the front line. The occupation mayor of Gorlivka, about 31 kilometers from the front line, Ivan Prihodko, claimed that Ukrainian strikes the major gas station in Gorlovka. Russian objective: maintain frontline position, secure rear areas against Ukrainian strikes, and advance within tube artillery range in Zaporozhye city. Russian forces likely completed the seizure of Gulyai-Pole sometime after April 2026. Russian forces continue infiltration missions west of Gulyai-Pole. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Moshavets reported on July 27 that Russian forces are infiltrating near Novoselovka, Gulyai-Polskaya, Charivne, and Vadianovka, all northwest of southwest of Gulyai-Pole, suggesting that Russian forces have likely consolidated their position within Gulyai-Pole and are now operating further west. Moshavets also reported that Ukrainian forces hold position north of Mirna. ISW last observed evidence of Ukrainian force operating in Gulyai-Pole's city limits and within Mirna in April 2026. Moshavets' statement and the lack of evidence of observed Ukrainian position within Gulyai-Pole or Mirna since April indicate that Russian forces have likely seized Gulyai-Pole and Mirna at some point since late April 2026. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are interdicting Ukrainian logistics along the T-808 Orekhov Novo-Mykolaiivka highway between Amelnik and Mikilske. both northeast of Orekhov and west to northwest of Gulay-Pole. The Mill blogger reports it's accurate may indicate that Russian forces are attempting to degrade Ukrainian forces' ability to defend amid the slow Russian forces' rate of advance west of Gulay-Pole. Ukrainian forces recently cleared Russian service members in western Zaporizhia region as Russian forces infiltrated on a prior date. Geolocated footage published on July 28th shows Ukrainian forces clearing a Russian forces position in a windbreak northeast of Stepnogorsk, west of Orkhiv. Moshavets reported on July 30th that Ukrainian forces maintained position in Lapkove, it's southeast of Stepnogorsk, indicating that Ukrainian and Russian position are likely intermixed in and near the settlement. Moshavets reported that Ukrainian forces attempted to counter-attack in the southern Stepnogorsk and southern Primorskaya to unblock Russian forces there, indicating that Russian forces previously infiltrated southern Stepnogorsk and southern Primorsk. Ukrainian counter-attacks in western Zaporizhia region and in the Orekhov direction have allowed Ukrainian forces to seize the tactical initiative in their sector of the theater, halt the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army, Moshavets reported on July 30th that 58th Army and its attached elements from the 18th Army and Russian airborne forces have failed to make meaningful gains either along the Dnipro River or toward Orekhov, and that the 58 CAA and supporting elements are attempting to conduct an active defense along the 58th CAA western flank along the Dnipro River near Plavny, west of Orekhov, to prevent Ukrainian forces from advancing further towards Kamenskaya. Moshavets reported that Russian forces are attempting to establish better tactical position north of Kamenskaya with limited success after previous Ukrainian counter-attack in the area. Moshavets reported that Ukrainian force advanced along the Stepnogorsk-Plavny vector and that Russian forces attempted unsuccessfully to counter-attack with infiltrators in southern Stepnogorsk and southern Primorsk. Moshavets accused that the Russian military command in the area is worried about its increasingly difficult situation as Ukrainian forces attack towards Kamenskaya. Elements of the Russian 5th and 36th CAA, its combined armies, immediately west of the 58th CAA area of responsibility, continue conducting offensive operation toward Orekhov Adnak. However, Moshavets reported that Russian forces are attempting to encircle Orekhov and on the 58th CAA eastern flank in combination with the 5th and 35th CAA efforts from Gulay-Pole to Orekhov. Moshavets reported that Russian forces regularly attempt to advance toward Pavlivka, it's northwest of Orekhov, and Novoandreevka, west of Orekhov, as a part of an effort to reach high ground near Novo-Alexandrovka, southeast of Zaporozhye city, along the H08 Orykhov-Zaporozhye city highway, and to establish fire control over Ukrainian forces' main ground line communication to Orykhov. Moshavets reported that Russian forces have had limited success infiltrating from Cherbaki and Nesteryanka toward Novoandreevka, but have not reached Novoandreevka itself, further reporting that Ukrainian forces blocked Russian infiltrators south of Pavlovka. Moshavets assessed that the current tactical situation in western Zaporizhia region has persisted for about 2 weeks, with Russian forces failing to significantly increase their effort along several vectors. Moshavets forecasted that Russian forces will concentrate on holding the area north of Yanchek-Rak River near the Dnipro River. Going forward, will seek dislodge Ukrainian force north and northeast of Stepanogorsk-Malye-Sherbaki line, and will continue counter-strike in Plavny and Stepnogorsk. Moshavets accused that Russian force may choose to focus the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division of 58 CAA efforts east and southeast of Orykhov in combination with the 5th and 35th CAA efforts from Dobropilya, or may focus the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division west and southwest of Orykhov to make an attempt on the heights west of Orykhov, therefore leaving the 5th and 35th CAA without support. Moshavets also noted that Ukrainian forces are attempting to push Russian forces farther from the Zaporizhzhia city limits, as Russian forces are currently within from 22 to 33 kilometers from the city limits, allowing them to strike Zaporozhye city with a delivery array of weapon system. Neither Russian nor Ukrainian sources reported ground activity on Kherson direction on July 30th. Ukrainian forces continued their campaign to degrade Russian air defense assets and other military assets in occupied Crimea, and the Crimean Occupation Authority struggle to counter Ukrainian strikes. Ukrainian unnamed system force Commander Major Robert Magyar Braudy reported on July 30th that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian unnamed sea vehicle base in Snezhny, about 116 kilometers from Frontline, and radio transparent shelters for radar station antennas in Okhotniche, about 261 kilometers from the front line. Ukrainians' main military intelligence directorate reported that Ukrainian forces struck a Murmansk BM electronic warfare system, which can reportedly intercept and jam signals at the range up to 5,000 kilometers in Cape Fioland, about 240 kilometers from the front line, on the night of July 26 to 27. Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty Crimea service reported on July 30th, citing an insider source that Crimean occupation head Sergei Aksyonov approved a plan sloughing the responsibility of air defense on local Crimean occupation authorities at the regional level. Bars Crimea formation is incapable of protecting infrastructure in occupied Crimea, now, which is true. Ukrainian forces continued strike against Russian tankers conducting logistics to occupied Crimea overnight on July 29th to 30th. Brody reported that Ukrainian forces struck 4 additional Russian tankers overnight, presumably in the Black Sea and Azov Seas, for a total of 2,005 tankers struck since July 6th. So now Russian air, missile and drone campaign target Ukrainian military and civilian infrastructure in the rear and on the front line. Russian forces continued their campaign against Ukrainian port infrastructure and merchant ships. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Council head Mykola Lukashuk stated that Russian strikes against cargo ships forced the Pivdenny iron and steel plant in Kryvyi Rog to partially suspend operation, and the Poltava iron and steel plant to suspend operation starting August 3 and lasting for about 10 to 20 days until about August 13th or 20 from August 13 to 23rd, where Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that Russian forces struck a fuel and lubricants tank in the port of Odessa city, 2 dry cargo ships in the port of Yuzhny Odessa region, and a cargo ship near Snake Island with Geran 4 jet-powered drones during the day on July 29. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that Russian forces struck fuel infrastructure near Novy Bilyare in Odessa region, and 4 dry cargo ships, including 1 each in the port of Odessa city and Yuzhny, and 2 at the sea south of Odessa city during the day on July 30th. The Kremlin-affiliated Russian meal blogger claimed that Russian forces may have used 2 low-altitude Ha-35 missile launched from a Bal coastal air defense launcher to strike shortage facility in the port of Odessa. Russian forces also continued their campaign against Ukrainian gas station, particularly along major rear area around line of communication. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed on July 30th that Russian forces are striking Ukrainian gas station non-stop, and Russian security forces claimed to Russian media outlet that Russian force destroyed all the main gas station along the M03 Poltava-Kharkov, M18 Kharkov-Dnipro, and P51 Kharkov-Pavlograd, and M30 Dnipro-Pavlograd highway on July 28th. And this is all review I want to do, guys. No questions, no comments, so at least like, subscribe, and stay with us. We're going to do it more often. So thank you, you coming and watching. Thank you, guys.
The headlines. Breaking through the static. Global update.